Good morning. Marina Crane here. It's August 10th, 2026. And the weather report, still can't see the Rockies. Still smoke in the air. What can I say? The world is burning. I just hope everybody's doing a lot better, like finding cool places to be or places where there's a lot of fresh air. And understand, Alberta was one of the places in the planet that has the cleanest air until we get forest fires, and that's because of all this stuff. We're the third largest oil producer because of crude oil, but yet the amount of water it takes from the earth in the northern parts, and they wonder why all of the forests are burning. Okay, that's not my podcast that I'm hoping to talk about today. And a lot is happening. We talk about people we care about, we've grown up with, and then, recently one of the older couples, one of the partners died. And so everybody's worried about her husband and how he's handling things. And, I think for women, when women decide to have children and there's death within the family, the woman, the children help their mom. Even if they don't directly understand it, it's because women lose their identity with every child they birth. So for the first 5 years, their identity is lost within the child. Like, say with my mother, she lost 5 years of her identity with me. And again, men don't have that because it's not part of their hormone or their brain structure. But again, too, there's a difference too in terms of how men behave. Some are very violent and in how they eat. Like when I'm saying violent, I'm not really talking about some, yes, physically assault, but in terms of even thinking, there are violent ways of thinking that people don't sort of get. But then for me, when I look at the whole structure of the men that I've grown up with and the life that they've chosen to live, their partners, the relationships, there are differences. And I think when men use all their energy into suppressing or controlling, it's a little harder for them. And I'm not saying harder in the sense, I think they're very brittle or very weak, fragile human beings, whereas men who aren't violent in the sense of how they treat their whole life and what they do to people is done because of free will. For them, they're malleable. They're a little stronger than most men. That's just my opinion. I could talk about examples, but I won't this time. This time I want I want to talk about like a lot of the denialism of Indian residential school, or just the whole Indian Act and why it was created, and why a lot of people have some misconceptions about it. And of course, I'm not naive to having misconceptions about how I grew up either. I mean, these things weren't taught to me in curriculum. The only reason I know some things is because my family was politically involved with a lot of things. And then when I was in my late teens, I became a political activist as a youth, finding other youth who were teaching me things that I should have known but didn't know because I wasn't in university. So I'm going to play this clip, and it's with a black woman. She's her name is Dr. Dr. Joy Grye, and she discusses racial trauma and the impacts of the past on the present. This powerful lecture clips features Dr. Joy Grye, the author, educator, and researcher recognized for her work on post-traumatic slave syndrome. In this discussion, Dr. DeGray analyzes the historical lynching photos and explores the psychological effects of racial violence, dehumanization, and the ways societies can become conditioned to accept cruelty. Dr. DeGray's message challenges viewers to examine how slavery, lynching, and racial terror shapes American history and how the memories and the consequences of those events continue to influence conversations about race, culture, empathy, and society today. This video invites reflection, education, and respectful discussion. Understanding history helps us better understand the present and consider how communities move forward. So a lot of parallels with Black history and Indigenous peoples of the Americas is so vital because, again, like in the 1500s with the conquistadors taking girls 14, 15, impregnating them, even the whole notion that like the Portuguese and the Dutch were part of the most cruelest colonizers in torture and just horrible things they did to the Indigenous people. But at the same time, they were also doing slave trade, like from Portugal to Africa. So the Black people had already been exposed to the diseases of the Europeans, but again, without having scientific proof. And again, even today, people are in denial about this. But when they came over, the millions of Indigenous people that they infected because our biology wasn't equipped to fight the diseases that they were bringing into the Americas. And because of that, Indigenous people were thought of as being poor specimens to be slaves. And so if they did try, the Indigenous people would sort of melt into other tribes. So it was very difficult to have Indigenous slaves because they would die. And so, again, a lot of this history, even when they banned all those thousands of ships that were coming from Africa into the Americas, for I think 100 years after they stopped that shipment, the plantation owners were created what they call where they were just breeding. They were breeding Black slaves with Black women. Like they just producing all these slaves. Anyway, they did try to do that with Indigenous people, but it didn't succeed. So, and I have my own theories, and these are my own personal opinions about what happened in Canada, because understand, Abraham Lincoln, who supposedly ended slavery in the United States, he was instrumental in decreeing the largest mass execution of Sioux people in Minnesota in the late 1800s. And this is the same time, like after the Civil War. So all this trying to have control over the Indigenous population or annihilate genocide. And what does it have to do with the Indian Act? Well, I'll have you listen to the tape, and then I'll have my 2 cents or my opinion on this. So if I can somehow get this, I thought I had it set up, but I guess I didn't. But hold on, we'll try it again. Here we go. Nope, it's not doing that.
What's the matter with you? The playing field has been leveled. Well, we're going to see if, in fact, it's been leveled. Or is that conjecture?
This is a clip from a lecture given by Dr. Joy DeGruy about post-traumatic slave disorder. Dr. DeGruy is an author, educator, and researcher who examines how slavery and generations of racial oppression continue to shape society. In this clip, she discusses a lynching photograph and focuses on the white children calmly witnessing the violence. She argues that atrocities of slavery didn't only affect Black people, it also conditioned others to accept the cruelty without empathy. Her message challenges the idea that the past doesn't matter and explains why its effects can't simply be dismissed by saying move on.
Now, I want you to look at this photo very closely. I want you to see who's in it. More important than the man hanging, because you got to understand the lynchings that occurred in America happened after slavery, not during. Thousands of lynchings happened after slavery, because this is a reaction to white fear of what we would do. once freed. But we didn't create a vigilante group to take out white people. But they did create a vigilante group to take us out now that we're free. See, that happened after slavery. They were called the what? The Ku Klux Klan. They don't wear hoods anymore. They wear suits. But they're alive and well all over the world, even here. So, look at who's in the picture. I want you to look at this little girl in particular. You can't see her closely, but she's actually grimacing, like smirking. Now, remember, let's go back to the puppy concept here. She would be loathed and torn up probably if this was a puppy, which means he's less than that. Because she's not disturbed. This little girl is not disturbed by this, but she should be, shouldn't she? People always ask me, they go, Joy, what was the impact on white people? There it is. Right there. Can't feel any empathy for him. None, zero, zip. There's a little one back here, even smaller. Because whatever she's been taught or told, socialized to believe, makes him no longer human. That's the greatest danger to white people, is that they can't feel it. And there's a reason why white people can't feel what we're talking about. My God, what would you then feel? It's tough. So I've got to believe, oh, it's all over now, it's not my fault, I don't benefit, it's not a big deal, let's move on, it's not all of those things. But we don't say that to Jewish people. I dare you. But you have to understand, when you unearth this one, that's what we did to our children. Well, you people just pull yourselves up from your bootstraps. What's the matter with you? The playing field has been...
See, so again, like the key question was, cannot feel empathy, okay? So recently over the weekend, there was a automobile accident, and two corrections officers were bringing a young woman, an Indigenous young woman, 24 years old, who had served 2 years of a 7-year sentence for manslaughter. They were transporting her, and on the highway, a vehicle hit them, and the two correction officers and the Indigenous young woman died. When the story broke, they didn't even mention the Indigenous woman. They were paying homage to the security of the corrections officers who had died en route. Now, in the past couple of days, all of a sudden, her name has been coming up. Tamara, I think her name is Tamara Murusa. And she was 24, and she was a mother. She had children. She had family.
First time is why.
She had all this. Her name, let's see. Her name is Kiara, Kiara Moosaw, Moosaw. And that's she died, but they didn't even mention her name when the story first broke. And again, I think part of that is like this. They don't have empathy. They have more empathy for the correction officers than they did for this young Indigenous woman. Now, in hindsight, when you think about it, if she were white, would her white parents sue the government for not looking after or protecting her en route from one prison to the next? And that's the question that society needs to ask themselves, because right now people are saying her name. They want people to know who she was, especially Indigenous women, because again, they're erasing the existence of this young woman. I've read a comment will say, oh well, she killed a human being. Well, she served 2 years out of a 7-year sentence, and again, she was supposed to be protected by these these correction officers. So that's my question. There is like, why can't people feel? What would they feel if they really thought about it? Now, again, when we're talking about how some white people would have more empathy for a puppy than they would for a child or another human being that's Indigenous. And a lot of times when I listen to my mother talk about how she was treated or how her grandmother was treated, like when my great grandmother went to visit my mother, who was 5 to 15 years old when she went to boarding school. My mother said, she loved her grandma so much because she used to braid her hair. And anyway, my great grandmother went to go visit her, and my mother said they put her in the basement and put a bale of straw for her to sleep in. And even when I talk to people about like how poorly educated my mother was in human reproduction and healthy human sexuality, I said the people who were looking after her, the white people who were looking after her, treated her lower than a dog. In Sioux, there's no swear words, and my mother would say lower than a snake's belly. And so, my mother openly talked about things that she had a really difficult time comprehending things because she wasn't taught these critical thinking skills or understanding these because she was ignored. And I understand that in a sense, and I think I have a unique opportunity of that, because when I was 8 years old, I almost died from infectious hepatitis and double pneumonia. And for like 3 months, I was in isolation behind a doctor's desk at an Indian hospital. And I am going to write a claim for this because, for days and days, they didn't give me coloring pencils, anything to read, nothing. I was in total isolation, all by myself. And the only human contact I had is when people would come in and get urine samples and blood. And I was in an oxygen tent for weeks. But the reason I'm saying that is because of isolation and depravity, being deprived of human contact or anything to stimulate my brain. And I equate that to like how my mother must have felt, being put in like in a just like cattle and livestock in a corral, all just a whole bunch of animals just milling around, because that's how I felt. When I felt better, they put me in a regular dorm for a week before I was sent home. And believe me, I was scared, like I had threats by other Indigenous kids. So I can't even comprehend what my late mother had gone through as a child, like for 10 years of her life. But again, like I said, when she first got pregnant, she thought she was going to have a litter of puppies. And even when I say that and say this, I know some of my audience will probably laugh and kind of go, what? And I'll say, like I said to the academic PhD person who was sitting in the crowd when I was mentioning this story, I said, the reason my mother thought that is because nobody spoke to her about human reproduction, because she was away from her traditional family for 10 months out of the year. And her mother died. My grandmother had cancer. So there's a lot of things my mother didn't have the privilege of. And like I said, even the way they treated my great-grandmother, who helped raise my mom when she was away from the Indian residential schools. So those things, like I said, the lack of education or even human interaction, especially in terms of human development and how children learn from what they see and how they're being taught as a collective holistic community, whereas in Indian residential school, they were just totally neglected. Now, why am I bringing this up is because, my mother, my lineage, my grandparents are all Sioux, except for my one grandfather, my dad's side. He's a mix of Cree and Sioux. So when Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, he also declared and approved the largest mass execution of Sioux people in Minnesota. In Mankato, 38 Sioux people were hung. Now, understand this, they did this so they could have ownership of the property and chase all the Sioux out. They had bounty on the Sioux heads. And that's why I say when it comes to scalping, just hunting Sioux women down who were pregnant so they could gut them and take the baby's scalp and the mom's scalp. There was a town that was just created in South Dakota just for bounty hunters like that. Again, history that people don't talk about. And so this is my opinion and why I think this whole notion of slavery comes into play, because again, they just didn't think Indigenous people were going to make good slaves. Again, not even understanding biologically, we were not immune to those diseases of the Europeans. So how could they train us to be slaves? Well, they started an industrial school in colonial Canada. Like we have one in Calgary in the late 1800s, around the same time as Lincoln, around the same time as all this mass execution and all this freeing of the slaves. Even though for the 100 years before, there were plantations that were breeding farms. Okay, so all this notion of like other human beings lesser than other human beings. So what did they do? They created the Indian Act, and in the Indian Act, it was to control what did they call them now? Something savages. The whole definition too. It makes us like this lady saying, a child will have more empathy for a dog, and I find it's the same thing with white people today. I have puppies, I have dogs, I take care of them, and yet veterinarians and people just think that I'm a horrible person. And I have a lady who defends me and says, "Oh no, Marina is a really good. She takes care of her pets." It doesn't matter, because it's the white notion that I don't, and I'm not going to spend my time arguing with somebody that I'm a bad pet owner. Again, where does this attitude come from? It's so sublime in the sense of people not understanding. So this is what I propose. The Canadian government knew that they couldn't actually, make slaves. So they had to, but they wanted to. And how they did it is they started industrial schools to educate Indigenous boys, young boys. Young. We're talking children. They're babies. So they could be ranchers and farmers. No, so they could be the slaves to ranchers and farmers. So they could do the grunt work of ranchers and farmers. And they, like in Parliament, the one part that I read was like, oh, well, we educate these boys and they'll go back to the reserves and they'll marry and the girls will convert them back to savages. Savages, savages. So the whole notion is like they cannot convert savages into being slaves because we're so uncivilized. So the only way they could do it was to be guardians over these savages. And that's why they set up this whole trust fund, guardianship and crown land, because we were incapable of even processing logic and critical thinking skills, or that we even had a philosophy. And my goodness, like we didn't live here for 20,000, 10,000 years. Like how savage are we? That we were just grunting around, sniffing at the earth. I just can't comprehend that people think this way or have been continuing to think this way, and today they still do. And I think that's what's so ironic, is that even though we have computers and social media, that we still have notions of propriety, like who is more superior, who's more sophisticated. And yet it's not even that, because it takes dedication and understanding, and really understanding how human behavior is, especially when it comes to patriarchy. It's the same thing with matriarchy too, but all the more so with the way the world is right now. So again, they had to create Indian residential schools so that the girls and boys could still get proper propaganda fed into them, proper religious dogma and instructions of how to live and what not to do. And my goodness, you got to worship the ground they walk on, which is called fawning, and which turns into limerence, which turns into mental health unbalance and disorders. So, of course I'm going to be quite upset, because even when all they're doing is pursuing to get something for nothing, like taking my mother and father into South America and India just so they could convert and get governments to understand that capitalism wasn't bad. And look at how we're treating the Native Americans in Canada and the United States. Look at how civilized they are. And we can do this for your Indigenous people. in South America and India. Like, it's so colonial. And I say too, like, anytime a person is breaking away from a cult, it has to be heart-wrenching, and it has to unbalance your very identity, like to the very core, that you have to question the very reasons of why you think the way you do. And like I've said, I've gone through all those in my life as an Indigenous woman who is an elder now, who has struggled and has, really tried to have a good narrative with other people about the way I think and why I think the way I do and why people think the way they do as well. So that's why when I talk about these issues that are just coming into Parliament in terms of the grandfathering and grandmothering of all the Indigenous people who lost their status since the beginning of the Indian Act, as well as having sovereignty over our own child and family welfare system, our own child and family system based on sovereignty in 2026. And this is an act that took place in the late 1800s. Like, how long has it taken for all this to come to fruition? And that the reality of, like, how people cannot feel empathy. They cannot feel empathy to how it is to live under that act, that Indian Act. Have empathy for Indigenous women who marry outside of their race, who marry white men, Chinese men, any kind of man that's not classified as being Indigenous under the Canada, how they labeled it in Canada. So again, they cannot. It's just like you cannot feel. It's like you're participating in something like a celebration. Like this lady said, the young girl was participating, watching a celebration of a hanging of a human being, and she's enjoying it, and yet the whole thing is like she should be disgusted with it. Like, and why have a child witness this? Like, see, that's the whole thing too. Like I said, I grew up my whole life with white kids in the city of Calgary. Just the whole celebration of celebrating that I'm a savage, I'm a beast, I'm a monster. Literally to my face every day in school. And yet, like, even my challenging them and saying, no, the Indians of South America were so advanced they were even doing brain surgery, while your people in Europe were still shitting in their castles and, you name it. Like, I can't even comprehend how a society would be drinking beer for a whole 100 years because they couldn't have clean drinking water. And you look at all the data centers and everything that's happened in the United States. And even when I lived in the state of Utah, in the county where I lived, alcohol was banished from the convenience stores. But you go any place in the United States and alcohol is just free, like it runs like water. It's the same thing with guns and how people buy these things. See, and the reality of it is like fetal alcohol syndrome and alcoholism and reality of like, how do people, like, are they masking violence? See, and that's the whole reality of it, especially when it comes to patriarchy. And there is a difference. There is a difference of how men treat women when women give permission, and whereas other women don't give permission, but yet, there's some sort of act of addiction when it comes to people, especially men, who have this need to control. And again, the reality of it is, the more they want these data centers, the more the water they're going to use up. And if they use up all the fresh drinking water, then what's left? Soda, like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, vodka, beer, ale, you name it, everything and anything other than fresh drinking water. Now, I get my water from a well. My whole life, I've been raised on groundwater. I have rarely ever, except when I lived in the States, ever drank from the tap. But it's the reality of what people are living in and what they're accepting, and just the reality too of all these fires that have been going on, and the dryness and the heat that it's inevitable. We have lightning strikes and it starts fires, and all these people flying in from Mexico to help the people in British Columbia. There's a crisis there. Like this whole, even look at the earthquake in Venezuela. I can't even comprehend what people are doing, or like just the devastation. And yet we have people in power who, I get so sick and tired of seeing little clips of the United States president that it sickens me so much. I just flip the channel or switch the page. I can't comprehend why people would even listen to him. It boggles my mind, because it's just so irrational. And yet this is the best that they have. I don't know. I grew up with people who were hungry for science, who were hungry to understand the natures of the world, because there are lost civilizations like the pyramids, Machu Picchu, so many temples in Asia, all over the world, even in Montana, parts of stuff like pyramids in the United States. What the hell? Aren't people curious of how these were built? Like even the whole notion of physics and engineering, it amazes me that people, it's like turning on the TV and just watching. What does watching do unless you're actually, doing the actual work and constructing these things? It totally amazes me. It's like I grow my own vegetables, but this year I couldn't. Going into the grocery store and paying so much money for a head of lettuce when I can grow it. Now I know most people who live in the cities, they have to go to the grocery stores. But in southern Alberta, it amazes me that a lot of people want to separate from Canada, and yet these are people who immigrated into Canada. These are people who came from some poor place, thinking that Alberta was rich enough for them to create jobs, and now that they've settled here, they're still hungry for more money, for more opportunities, for more, because they think that they're being treated unjust. And so that's why, like with this lady talking about the lynching and how, the white supremacy has conditioned like their children just to, see it as a form of entertainment, that it's okay to treat other things, to treat human beings lesser than a snake's belly, and you can treat a pet like a dog or a parakeet better than you would another human being. It amazes me. Yet, that's the country and that's the way we live in. So I know it might seem ridiculous when I say, oh, they should have at least published that young woman's name. They should have at least said, that who she was when that accident happened. But they just focused on the two correction officers. So, but that's again, that's just the way things are. And I'm grateful that there are other non-Indigenous people who are actually advocating and trying to educate people about what's actually happening in the province of Alberta when it comes to all these cohorts and allies of Danielle Smith. Now, even though I'm talking about white people, I want you to understand there are Indigenous people who enabled Danielle Smith to be who she is. Because again, we're so susceptible to cults that it's easy to see her as a cult leader. But it's so difficult that once you've been stung by that woman, to actually debrief and decolonize yourself, or deprogram yourself from that leader of the cult. And again, a lot of people can't do it, and they just think, oh no, I've had a bad experience, that's it. But no, it takes hard work, hard psychological self-reflection, and not just a month or anything. You've got to do it, the work, due diligence. And no matter, like, all this stuff is built up, this whole white supremacy and everything. This isn't just something that just somebody woke up and said, I'm going to be a white supremacist. No, this has taken years and years of indoctrination, and people just not questioning it. And so that's why, like, for me, it's the same thing with Indigenous people. I grew up, thinking certain things, and I really had to do my due diligence. I had to go and pay for my own education, work full time, go to school, live in another country. And I'm not just saying just me. I know there are thousands of other Indigenous women and men who've done the same thing. But I'm also warning you that there are some who haven't done the work, and there are some who just placate, and as long as they're part of the system or feel like they've got a good white friend, like that the white friend is not going to grift them, then everything seems fine. Everything seems hunky dory when really it isn't. So, and I know people would like my friend said to me, Marina, like I was saying to her, I said, there are some people on TikTok, these white guys, they're talking about how people are stealing kids and draining their blood for Omicron something. And I said, do you know how ridiculous that is? I said, it's scientifically impossible, but yet here are these white people playing on the ignorance of their own people or other people who are listening, that humanity is so corrupt in terms of cannibalism, or, yes, there are missing children. Yes, there's human trafficking, but realistically, you got to take a look at the behavior of these people. Like, why do they behave this way, and why did they get away with it for so long? So it's like I said, a lot of this deviancy and the structures of society just didn't happen overnight. So Danielle Smith just didn't happen. She just wasn't that person when she was elected in as Premier of Alberta. This was a case of decades of her grooming herself to be in this position, like some sort of fallacy or an illusion of what she believes is good leadership. And again, who am I? Like, who the hell am I for you to listen to me? And rightfully so. You can question anything you want, but for me, like I said, I've had decades of doing a lot of grunt work when it comes to just how I've been treated, or how I think people, like just what people think. Now I want to, let's see here. I did one thing about hypersexuality, and for gamble, like if you're, how do you approach each differently? So this is for porn, masturbation, tapering is usually most substantial strategy. Do not taper. When why am I switching from this to this? Well, it has to do with central nervous system and keeping yourself regulated and understanding like all the things that are happening in life. But I don't know. Sometimes it amazes me too that people don't want to talk because they're actively involved in addiction, and I think that's why when I talk about white supremacy and I talk about how we're conditioned to treat some animals better than we treat human beings, I think sometimes we think we can participate in certain behavior and that we can cope when really we can't. So so with and I'm switching the topic too, because the topic was, can a person become hypersexual after decades of no sexual intercourse? And it says, yes, it is possible for a person to experience a significant increase in sexual desire or even hypersexuality after decades without sexual intercourse. While it is not a guaranteed outcome, historical and some modern perspectives suggest that prolonged abstinence can be a contributing factor to some individuals. Historical perspective, older medical literature proposed that prolonged abstinence in a person endowed by certain nature with a high degree of sexuality could result in a state of resembling satirical mania or hypersexuality in men. This was sometimes viewed as withdrawal symptoms. So understand this too. There's a huge degree of young men who are isolating themselves, not participating in life. Modern understanding. Today, hypersexuality is more often understood through psychosocial lenses. It is not simply a rebound effect from lack of sex, but is associated with underlying conditions. It can be linked to mood disorders like depression and anxiety, or a symptom of mania or bipolar disorder. So again, we got to question behavior and why people behave the way they do. Trauma history, early sexual trauma or adverse childhood experience are common risk factors. Coping mechanisms. It may be used to cope with negative emotions, psychological inflexibility, or feelings of loneliness. And that's why, like when I talk about women and women choosing not to be, like, say, with men who drink or who are violent, and the man feels like rejected and feels lonely, like, again, like, I'm only saying there's got to be a reason why there are so many men who are white supremacists and who want to oppress and have control over other people, treat other people like lower class. Ultimately, experience an urge and desire after a long period of abstinence doesn't automatically mean someone has a disorder. It becomes a concern only when these urges cause sufficient distress or start to interfere with daily life relations or work. Okay, so I hope this information helps clarify the complexities of this topic. If these feelings are causing you distress, speak with a mental health profession, could provide personal support and guidance. So when it comes to, like, say, masturbation, porn, gambling is best tapered off in these, like, for people. They said, like, when they're doing the analysis and what's happening when people are, say, they're not regulated, they have their central nervous system is completely unbalanced because they're so actively addicted in the way they're thinking about these topics. For gambling, absolutely no. Do not taper. For porn and masturbation, tapering is usually the most sustaining strategy. Okay, so again, this is what they're saying here. Gambling, do not taper. Gambling is a behavioral addiction that operates on a valuable ratio reward schedule, the most addictive type. Trying to taper gambling only once a week or a small amount almost always backfires. The urge to chase losses or get a big win overrides logic. The gold standard clinical advice is complete, immediate abstinence. Block access to sites, self-exclude from casinos, and hand over financial control if needed. 2. Porn. Tapering is usually best. Go cold turkey on porn often triggers the abstinence violation effect, where one minor slip up makes you feel like a failure, leading to a full-blown binge. Instead, a structured taper works well. Reduce frequency gradually from daily to 3 times a week, then try 1 time a week. Change the type of content to something less stimulating as a stepping stone. Critical, taper the time spent, not just frequency. Masturbation, reframe, do not taper. Masturbation is a natural biological function, not an addiction in the same category as gambling or compulsive porn. It is a compulsive, if it's compulsive, tapering is wise, but the best move is to decouple it from porn. Tapering by limiting masturbation to solo sessions without scenes. Once separated, your natural biological rhythm, example 1 or 3 times a week, usually balances itself out without needing a strict schedule. So in all 3, if you cannot just taper bad habits, you must replace them. Your brain needs the dopamine alternative. When you cut back, immediately schedule a replacement activity, exercise, cold showers, socializing, hands-on hobby to fill that void. Critical warning, tapering all 3 at the exact time is a recipe for failure because your brain's dopamine baseline will crash hard. Tapering 1 at a time starts with gambling, quit immediately, then tackle porn reduction, and then let masturbation naturally flow suit without porn. If you find you absolutely cannot taper porn or masturbation without extreme distress, or if you cannot quit gambling at all, that is a strong signal to seek therapeutical specialization in sexual health or addiction. They can help you create a personal, safe plan. So when I talk about healthy human sexuality, I'm talking about these addictive thoughts and the activity that's involved in it. So a lot of times, when you're observing people, like 20 years ago, like I hardly ever gambled in my life, but 20 years ago I thought, I shouldn't be gambling. And when Nathan Chasing Horse came into my community, I thought, okay, if I go to ceremony and I talk about, like, I'd rather go to ceremony than gamble. I noticed that he gambles. He's a notorious gambler. And then that's what really, like, oh my goodness. I thought this young man, understood addictions, but I, slowly realizing, like, that he was grooming people and trying to have control over people and trying to just greedy for money. So there's a lot of things that like I said, are underlying causes. But anyway, I was going to wait for a little while, but I really want to talk about this now because it does have to do with male sexuality. So I'm going to use four examples. There were 4 men in my community, and we'll do one as B. His name is B, and the other one was W. And there's an R and there's a B. Okay, so B I grew up with, and I've grown up with all these men, and all these men have children. Now B and W both had over 10 children, and I say the same with B. There are 2 Bs. There's B1 and B2. So B1 and B2 and W all had over 10 children. And R, he had 2 wives. Like, his first wife died and then he remarried. Now, there's a difference here too, and I want to make a distinction. So B1 and B2, they're very similar. They're different than W and R. And the reason for that is because of the way they think or how they use people to control or oppress them, or use a lot of energy to hide their deviant behavior. Whereas the 2 Bs, B1 and B2, like they willingly, like they were married, and they had like over 10 children. And B1, he quit drinking and followed the AA standards, had support with his family, so he was alcohol free, drug free, and eventually was monogamous. Now B2, he married and had his own children, and again he had 10 children. So I'm saying B1 and B2 had like at least 8 children. On top of that, they had 10 children from other women. And understand this, though, that the women that they had children with, that's both B1 and B2, those women it was all consensual. They knew these men were married. There wasn't any condition that they were trying to take these men away from their wives. This was all consensual. And there was no hesitation from B1 or B2 to have these women silenced. Like, keep it secret. I don't want people to know that you've had my child. No, B1 and B2 didn't have that kind of control over those women, and apparently, like, that was part of their personality. These women were consensual. They openly had an affair and had children with these men. Now, what is different with W and R? Well, W too. He later married, but he had, I think, about 5 children, and again 10 children. On top of that, he was sexually assaulting other younger women, teenagers. He was strategic in getting them intoxicated before he sexually assaulted them, and he coerced the women who had his children to remain silent. So he had this overwhelming need to control the women who, that he would never leave his marriage for these women. At the same time, too, the women that he sexually assaulted, he would make excuses that they were the ones who were coming on to him. They were ones who were chasing him, and that when they were drinking, it was consensual. So that was the way he operated, and there were, I think, about 10 of them that tried to charge him, but it was thrown out of court. Again, that's a critical thing when it comes to Indigenous women and the court system. Now, he had issues with his identity, and and even though there were a lot of Indigenous women like myself, I just never found him attractive. Like, I just didn't find any I wasn't sexually attractive to this guy. And the thing about it is, like, I think he was rejected by a lot of people, and maybe that's what made him different. But again, too, he had a propensity for boys. And this was something that probably he acquired, like, at an early age, because, he had identity issues, because I know people would say, like, are you Indigenous? And he says, no, I'm Mexican. Or when he was going to school, his mother would isolate him and not have him sit with the rest of the Indigenous kids. So there was a lot of things that, it was like as if he was protecting himself, even when he married, like, he didn't marry an Indigenous woman. Now, understand this, B1, B2, and W all married Indigenous women. But this particular R, he didn't. He, like I said, he had problems with his identity. And so a lot of times he used his status, like, I'm a good person. I'm this good person, like, I'm helping people. And a lot of people believed him, but he was like, he had to have had limerence, because I know he when he was younger, he was chasing after my neighbor, and 3:00 in the morning, he's banging on the door of her auntie, saying he wanted to talk to her, and he was just chasing her, and she didn't want to have nothing to do with him. Again, too, for some reason, this propensity for boys just sort of finally, he was charged. He's been charged with 2 historical counts of sexual assault of men, and again, he had to have drugged them, and again, trying to keep them quiet. When I talk about grooming, especially when he was in a position of power, that you could lose your job if you don't listen to him, because he's the boss. And so he had that throughout his life in the community, and today he still lurks around. You're still trying to have influence with people who were so codependent on him to give him money out of his pocket or out of our band funds. So again, the need to control people, to keep quiet, that's a very violent way of thinking. The same with W, using violence to control and keep people silent. And again, to R, his son committed suicide. So again, a very violent act. So there's a lot of things that I've grown up with seeing in men. And even though people, like, maybe have a religiosity and saying, oh, well, the 2 B's, B1 and B2, like the sin of thou shalt not commit adultery. I'm going, no, you gotta, if the baseline is sexuality in all human beings, then there's a baseline. And for those 2 men, they did not coerce, they did not have any sexual assault with women. The interaction they had with these women was completely consensual, whereas with W and R, it was very controlling, it was very violent. There was, like, the need to control, and all under the guise of, like, okay, they have all these children, like W had all these 10 children, and R, he was, again, had to have that structure of being a good religious person, that he's not cheating, and yet the deviancy of covering up his bisexuality was very violent. So again, when I talk about the grooming or the way people perceive human sexuality is vital, because when you look at somebody and you say, you look at them like they're lower than a snake's belly, and you treat them like what's happening to them as if like, oh well, they asked for it. That's a whole difference. W and R treated people that way, whereas the two B's, B1 and B2, didn't. They treated the women as being human. The women loved them, and their children loved their dads. They were quite open about who their children were, and their wives accepted it. It's just the nature of what they were dealing with or how they were living their lives, and that the women were participating. And so, again, this isn't coercion, and this wasn't done with women who were underage. This was not anything to do with trafficking, whereas like with W and R, their behavior is more onto that side of trafficking, like all that criminality, that all that stuff that becomes illegal, because again, they're coercing and they're using violence. So you can take a look and say, oh, okay, I understand, but you have to actually live it and see it to believe it, because it's just the way people are. And the majority of times, like I'm talking about a collective and holistic approach, a lot of times non-Indigenous people who live in the cities, and you can look at the Calgary Stampede, for example. All these people come in and they drink and they drug and they, marriage breakup and all this. That's human behavior. But yet somehow they smirk at Indigenous people, and just like us, we're lower than a snake's belly, yet even they're participating in the same sexual behavior. The only difference is like how violent it is. And sometimes I think if you take a look at it and step back and say, okay, it isn't. This is what's been going on from the beginning of time. That's why I talk about ritual abuse. I talk about cults, and the whole need to control other people for your own pleasure, for your own addiction, your active addictions. So that's why when they talk about gambling, it's just say you just taper off right. That's it. You don't participate. Whereas with pornography, you tape off, or masturbation. So again, the whole notion of how people behave in order to regulate their central nervous system, because when our central nervous system is attacked at an unconscious or conscious level, we radiate this heat. That's how our bodies cope, especially when all of a sudden somebody passes away. It just hits us to our core. And without us knowing it, our body heats up. How we've regulated our central nervous system is dependent on how closely we're attached to an active addiction. If we're not that closely attached to an active addiction, then our bodies don't heat up, and our blood pressure and everything doesn't get elevated. We're able to regulate. And sometimes like in preparation for, like, we don't know when it's our time that Creator's going to take us home, or even the people we love and those that love us, but it's the very notion of how do we help each other in the grieving process. And I totally think too, like when it comes to grieving, women have because if they've chosen to have children, the grieving process, it's the children that help the mom go through the grieving, much that like I did helping with my mother. And but with men, it's different, because those hormones, when the mom has the baby, she loses her identity for each child for 5 years. Whereas a man, he doesn't, the hormones and all that the male brain doesn't do the same thing. So when there's death, again, like if a man chooses to have children, I truly believe that it's the children or the holistic and collective approach of the community that will help the individual male heal from in the grieving process. So that's why it's important to understand this holistic and collective approach. I think sometimes you see it, men see it in like teams like hockey, football, any competitive sports. That's the healing process. But when you don't have that and you live in community like Indigenous people do in First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, then we have this is what we do when we talk about spirituality. So again, if people are ignorant and don't want to comprehend what I'm saying, or they think that I'm bullshitting or that I'm having some sort of conspiracy theory, fine, you're welcome to it. But again, there are a lot of Indigenous people who do listen to my podcast and do understand and can relate to what I'm saying. This isn't a bastardization of our men. It's a reality of the male physiology, as well as my trying to have women understand their own biology too, because we all are products of like millions of years of evolution. So whatever and however we understand where we go from here in the future for our children and our 7 generations, it's important to have these discussions, and all the more so, especially for Indigenous people who've been treated like savages. We've been treated as not even human in some cases, and I think as far as like the rights of Indigenous people, until we get these things changed in the Indian Act, until we get sovereignty over our own children, our own membership, like just land back type of philosophy, that we will elevate ourselves in society from being, again, in the 1800s, late 1800s, we were savages. Until like probably the early 50s, after World War II, we were elevated into subhuman, and now we're being evolved into being human. We're being equal as other human beings in the world today. So that's called the caste system. We've grown up and we were born into this caste system, and to understand the historical context of this whole evolution of what makes America great, through, say, slavery and treating different people from different walks of life as savages, subhuman, and that we're fighting to remain human beings and to be civil with each other. Well, anyway, thank you for listening to me. I hope you have a wonderful day. I know I have some plans to go drive around with my cousin again, and I'm just grateful that I have something to do on a daily basis by doing my podcast. And it's good to meet people and know that people are listening to me. And if you know me and you've met me and you listen to my podcast, then have a great day and drop me a line if you have the opportunity to. And in most cases, people just recognize me out of the blue. It's surprising. And I'm grateful for that. I'm truly grateful. And hopefully the message that I get across to people is we really got to take a look at how we treat each other and understand, where each person has come from. Because each person has a story of the struggles that they've done in their life to become who they are today. And with that, I'll say have a good day. Wopi da bidakia pia wasana. Creator, grandfathers, grandmothers, thy will be done.